This may seem like quite an odd thing to include in the 12 techniques, but it is something that not everybody is taught how to do. In this, we're going to measure a swatch for gauge. This swatch is knit in a double knitting weight yarn, and it measures about 5.5 by 5.5 inches, which is a really good size for a swatch. Before we measure the swatch, it is important to know what it is exactly that you're counting. In this, we are counting the stitches, and the way to identify stitches in stocking stitch is that they are the little V's at the front of your work. Stitches are organised in rows and columns, so you'll be counting those to get your row and your stitch gauge. The first thing to do is to lay out your swatch. You don't want to pull it too tightly because it'll distort the fabric. You want to lay the fabric as if you were wearing it, as if it was in use. A question I get asked often is, should I wet block my swatches? With swatches, you should treat them exactly how you will treat the finished garment. So for example, for this sweater, I'm going to wash it and lay it flat, so I've done exactly the same with my swatch. Once it's laid out, you want to make sure that you can measure for 4 inches in either direction, so along your rows and your stitches. You find a space right at the left corner and pin it at the very bottom of one of your stitches. It is from that point that you are then going to measure up and across your swatch. To measure your columns of stitches, what you want to do is make a line that follows up from where you've pinned it. This allows you to accurately count your column of stitches to get your row or round gauge. You then want to find the same length of stitches along, and this will get you your stitch gauge. You then measure 4 inches from the point at which you place the pin. Make sure you place the pin directly into the knitting at the 4-inch mark, and this means that even if it's a half row, you're still going to count it. I would manipulate the fabric to make it smooth so that you're getting a very accurate measurement of the stitches in that column. And then you pin exactly at the point. You then do the same across the stitch gauge. And again here, when you insert the pin, you want to make sure that it goes directly at the 4-inch mark to make sure that even if half stitches are there, they're also counted. We use 4 inches because it's quite representative of what you can expect when you knit a larger piece. Once you've done that, you are now ready to measure. I usually place my ruler to give me a guide as to where I am, but you can just count between the pins. So you count each of the V's all the way up along between the 2 markers. At the end, if you have a half stitch, make sure that you count that as well. You then do the same across the stitches. So again, you count the V's, and this will give you your stitch gauge. When you're making a swatch, you want to make sure that you are going to do it in the style in which you are knitting. So for example, this swatch has been knit flat, so back and forth in rows. If you were knitting an item in the round, you would want to make your swatch in the round as well. You now have your stitch and your row gauge per 4 inches or 10 centimeters. To get it per inch, you want to divide it by 4, and then you'll have your stitches and rows per inch.